Greetings, Internet! Welcome to the 175th episode extravaganza of the Comic Watchers Show. I'm one half of your host, mediocre Matt Meyer. Mighty Mike Akins is still on sabbatical. He had to get his beard trimmed, and it's a very lengthy process for him. He's got to get beautified. We understand. However, we're in good hands because churlish Chad Burdett will be joining us very shortly. For this episode, I am so proud to announce that we are joined by none other than Dan DiDio. Dan, thank you so very much.
Thanks a lot, Matt. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. I gotta say, like, you probably got a million stories about comic industry that we could dive into. Yeah. You started in animation. You did some other stuff for a while. Yeah. And now you and Frank Miller are launching next week. Frank Miller Press. Presents. Frank Miller Goodies. I have to say that on the one hand, what a honor to be working with industry legend like Frank Miller. On the other hand, like we were talking about before the show started, you're really doing this thing from the ground up, getting your hands dirty down in the dirt. Can you talk about the process of starting this new venture?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny story. We equate the start of the company to the Joker's origin right now because every time we tell the story, it's a little different, and I'm not really sure what actually happened on how we got together. But because I stay in touch with Frank for since for years, and even after I left DC, we kept on talking, we kept on meeting, and we were trying to find things to work on together. And ultimately, he was asking me to edit a project for him, which I could do because it would have been for DC and it would have been very awkward. And to say the least, And so ultimately I said, but I'd still like to do a book with you. And I mentioned about Ronin. I knew that Ronin had never been exploited before, and even at DC, we never really came near it because honestly, because it was co-owned between Frank and DC Comics, it didn't make financial sense for DC to publish it. But for Frank to publish it, it makes a lot of sense. And he always had a follow-up story to tell. He always said he had a story from when the first series ended. He wanted to tell another Ronin series, but naturally he got pulled into Dark Knight, and everything went crazy from there for him. Sure. And he never got back to this book. I said, well, if you want to do it, let's do it together. But I said, I don't want to do it with any other company. I want to start something fresh. I figured the two of us together, it only makes sense for us to create it and to build it. And I told him straight out, if you wanted to go to Dark Horse or Image or somewhere, I probably didn't need to be involved. And he really wanted to work together. And so there we are. All of a sudden we're starting the company, and it was interesting for me because naturally I'd spent 20 years at DC working on books, but to be actually rolling up your sleeves and doing every aspect of the creation of the product, as I said to you, it's a little humbling, but it's extraordinarily rewarding and extraordinarily exhausting. I can tell you, to actually hold those books in your hand, there's a sense of accomplishment that comes with something that you were that involved in. That it was greater than anything else before I had worked on,
So, I mean, this is obviously a real labor of love, and there's a lot more talent on hand than just Frank himself. He's got Philip Tan and Daniel Enriquez working with him on Ronin Book 2.
Correct.
What, from your perspective, as kind of the co-overseer, I guess, for lack of a better term, what is it like watching Frank and these other talents collaborate versus just Frank on his own? I know you've seen both.
Oh, this has been one of the most fascinating journeys, and I feel that's an overused word, but this really was a journey to work on this project from where we started to where we are now. And you start with the fact that I've known Philip Tan and worked with Philip for about 15 years. He's one of my favorite collaborators personally, extraordinarily talented, but also just constantly looking at different projects. And what was interesting is that he had such respect for Frank, and Frank enjoyed his work so much that they clicked almost immediately. And Frank, to be honest, he's doing layouts for this book that we could have published. But the truth be told is, and truth be told, we probably will publish it at some point. But right now, he's been working with Philip because he really wants to help nurture and move talent along, and really reintroduce aspects of craft that he feels has gotten away from the business. And we talk about this all the time, and he says it's not just about working with new talent, it's working with existing talent, really honing their skills and elevating the material. And it takes somebody who's been in the business for a long time to agree to work in that fashion, because it's basically saying that I'm still learning instead of I'm on the top of my craft. And Philip absolutely adores working with Frank. So this has been this fabulous collaboration. And when they first started, it was a little rough, figuring out how to make it work. And it took a lot of time and effort. And ultimately, once Frank started doing fuller layouts, and once you see the book, you'll see Frank's layouts on here. But Philip started to take Frank's layouts and then started to rework them. And Frank was getting excited by Philip's work. Philip was getting excited by Frank's work. And then you bring Daniel Enriquez in here, and then all of a sudden the thing explodes. And the most interesting moment is when I asked Frank for the variant cover for number 1, because Frank's doing the variant covers. And Frank sees Philip's and Daniel's cover, and he goes, "Oh shit, I've got to up my game." And all of a sudden he calls up Daniel and says, "Can we work together now?" And all of a sudden now Frank's collaborating with Daniel Enriquez, and they're doing special tones and different styles of art. And that's the fun part. That's what's really exciting about this. I can't say this enough times, and I repeat it every time I talk to people. It's the real fun of comics is collaboration. It's not about locking yourself in a room and crafting something that's so particular to your style and work and vision, but it really is working with others and really elevating the material from all the different voices they're brought in. And when you see Frank Miller, who has nothing left to prove in the business, finding himself to challenging himself to trying to improve himself, then you got something special going on here. And we can't control what sells and what doesn't sell, but what we can control is what we create and how we create it and who we create it with. And that's been the fun part of this whole operation,
Absolutely. From a craft standpoint, I like what you said. Of course, Frank has nothing left. Hey, Chad.
Hey,
hi.
We made this whole thing happen, ladies and gentlemen.
I know, it's exactly. I think this started with you, right, Chad?
It did.
Yeah, well, it started when I ran into you at New York Comic Con.
Yeah.
I think I was walking down the alley of Artist Alley, and walking in Artist Alley's hard. It's like I almost tripped and kind of shifted. It's like, oh crap! I almost ran into Dan DiDio.
That's good. Most people want to run into Dan DiDio. That's good.
It's lonely at the top, man. You always put a target on your back. Yeah. But you were talking about Frank Miller's craft, and he has nothing left to prove. And I was interested by you saying that his roughs were basically worthy in and of themselves to be published. Yeah. And I'm kind of curious because when Ronin was first published, and I've got my trade around here somewhere, but it's in my opinion the most hyper detailed work Frank Miller has ever produced. I mean, it's still obviously Frank Miller, but my God, the amount of time and care he clearly put into it has never again been matched. And of course, his style is very obviously evolved and changed and adapted some Eastern influences over the last couple of decades as well. Do you think that, or do you see him kind of finding a new way to express that older Ronin style, or is he moving towards something brand new?
The book itself is really interesting because everything Frank does, when he lays it out, as a double-page spread. So everything's set as a double-page spread to start, and then there's a panel breakdowns in some of the pages, but some of them are just giant double-page spreads for the story because he really wants that manga-style scope and the big imagery and the power that brings to it. And that the Eastern influences are all over this, and that's why he really wanted to work with Philip, because Philip has actually done work in manga. So he brought that manga sensibility to Ronin, which in the most natural style possible, that really brought the book to a different style of life and sensibility, you know?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it's one thing when it's like, oh, one of the old masters is making something new, and then we get it, and it's really good, and we love it, but it kind of feels like, okay, we have read this before, even though I love this. But
Yeah.
it sounds to me like you're saying Frank is definitely inspired by his collaborations here to
Yeah.
push himself in new directions.
You know, if you see Frank's work, and you know, I've worked with him long enough now.
Sure.
If you see his work, he doesn't really repeat himself if he goes back to revisit something. So if he's working on a project, he has a very particular style, he moves forward. But if he leaves a project and comes back to it, it has to come back to it in a different style and form. He doesn't
Right.
want to be repeating.
Sort of that
Yeah,
justification.
exactly. He doesn't want to be repeating the same sensibilities, because he's trying to show that it's a constantly moving, evolving process, and it's not just one thing. He doesn't want to be replaying old hits all the time. And
Right.
you know, and I think that's essential to what this is all about. And when I talk about the craft aspect, it actually a lot. Even though we started the process beforehand, Neil's passing was a very big moment for Frank, primarily because Neil was realistically his mentor and almost a second father to him in ways.
Sure.
And when he passed, he remembered everything that Neil taught him and was able to make him a better artist and best be, you know, help challenge himself. And he wanted to be basically playing it forward in a way and start to work with people and start to manage it. And that's been the fun part. From the folks that we're working with, I mean, we're launching with 3 series, and we're talking about Ronin and Ancient Enemies. The 3rd series is a series that Frank conceptually started, which was Pandora, Frank Miller's Pandora. And he's working with Emma Kubert. And you think Emma Kubert had enough people to influence her over the years and
right
how to work. And I see the two of them. She goes in and visits them once a month, and they sit around and they talk and they sketch, and they're sitting there talking, and you can see how much fun they're both having. I would say Frank's having, but they're both having the enjoyment of sitting in a studio. And Frank tells the stories about being in the studios with people like with, you know, Howard Chaykin or Walt Simonson. And I think those were his primary studio mates in the day, you know. And again, that collaborative nature of what comics are is, I think, what is keeping us motivated and keeping us excited.
Sure.
Even when I work on Ancient Enemies, you know, I started to, you know, I was very, you know, structured in my storytelling at the start, and I was working with a new artist to me at least, Danilo Beirut. And when I saw him open up his artwork, I actually pulled back my storytelling just to give him more room to knock it out of the park, you know?
Yeah. And
you know,
I'm looking at the pages and covers that have been released so far, and it's pretty awesome stuff.
Yeah.
Like this is definitely a guy that got somewhere to go in a hurry.
Oh no, and I'll tell you right now, both these books, even for Philip, who's been in the business for almost 2 decades, and Danilo, who's just been around for a while, I feel these are career books for them, because it's a way for them really to showcase themselves in ways that people never saw them before. So I'm excited by them both there. I mean, you know, and then we come in, and the other side of the coin is, you know, you get to be an old guy a little bit, and we get to be cranky old men every once in a while. All of us, even the young guys, get to be cranky old men. And what we do is we sit there, we talk about what we feel is lacking in comics, or what we feel is missing in comics, or we feel what comics has gotten away from. And that was actually, if you want to pull back even further, that's the true motivation behind everything here. It's put your money where your mouth is. You know, if we think things are missing from comics, a way to tell stories better or get people focused back on reading books instead of just buying covers, then ultimately we got to put our money where our mouth is and create something worth reading, or create something that people are going to want to buy. So we really want to put ourselves in a way to basically lead by example again. And way to say it is that, and I can't tell you if we're right or wrong, but at least we are putting out product that we believe in. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't work, at least we went out in a way that we felt we were comfortable in the types of books that we would want to read, and hopefully other people would want to read too, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. There's something to be said for being the elder statesman. But at the same time, and I hear that in what you're saying with the collaboration happening, or the energy flow happening with Emma Kubert, is it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
You know, the old
Absolutely.
guard, so to speak, for lack of a better term, can remind the next generation of the building blocks, and then the older cats can learn something new from these Gen Z kids, or whatever you want to call them.
Listen,
They who are coming for us.
Listen, you always got to be learning. You always got to be challenging yourself. But again,
Yeah,
you just don't want to forcing your tastes and flavors on everybody is not the way to win an audience or build anybody.
Well, no, it's a way to kill the industry.
Exactly. So the goal is to really. The goal is, again, when I talk about craft, it's not about a particular art style. It's not a particular thing. It's a particular style of storytelling and things that are necessary in order to properly present your material. It's not anything about trying to force anybody in very rigid box in the way you create things. It's just more along is teaching that foundation, what you need for the basic rules of storytelling, so you can build a story on top of that foundation, so you have a strong base to work from. That's what it's about. And the great part about Frank Miller Presents is, when I say nothing's in a box, we're not in a box. You have this incredible science fiction manga style series in Ronin. You have a very traditional superhero story going on, even though it's not traditionally told, but it's a very traditional style superhero story going on in Ancient Enemies. And then you have this real wonderful young adult fantasy taking place in Pandora. So you put the three books together, you would never know they came from the same company if you were just looking at the interior material. And that's the perfect way to start a company. You don't want to be classified or pigeonholed coming out of the gate. You got to be as wide as possible and see where the audience is, and then gear your material towards that audience.
Nail on the head, my friend. Yeah. Chad, I have sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Please jump in.
No, that's okay. I mean, maybe I hope you guys haven't covered this before I got here, but Dan, do you? I like to always find out if people I talk to remember maybe their first comic book, or maybe the one that got them kind of interested. What say you?
Oh, that's an easy one. That's an easy one. I can point to a lot of comics and things that I remember. And there's a certain age or a certain time that I remember comics. I still have my what I call my first comic, even though it might not be my first comic. I have a Spider-Man 40. Spidey saves the day. He's standing over the beaten form of Green Goblin. I was a big Green Goblin fan as a kid watching the cartoon in the 60s. And I bought that book, and it was like wildness. And I read that. Then there's a lot of crazy little Jimmy Olsens that I had along the way. My first Batman was, believe it or not, the first appearance of Poison Ivy. That's 6-year-old Dan seeing something in a comic he doesn't understand until 10 years later. But I have a lot of fun little books like that. But you know what it was for me is that I liked a lot of the monster magazines, Famous Monsters of Filmlands and things like that. So I was reading early on, ongoing House of Secrets, House of Mystery, Where Monsters Dwell, Creatures, Monsters on the Prowl, things of that nature. And then I always say that backdoored me in a weird way into superheroes. I followed Zemu the Titan into Defenders, and I got into superheroes there. I followed Swamp Thing into Batman, and it started to get into the superhero world in that sense. But I've always had a much greater interest in the corners of the universe than the through line of the superheroes. I always love the variety of product that comics always presented. I always like to see different things.
And so, what made you, want to get into the? I mean, obviously your love for the medium, but what made you want to pursue this? Yeah.
It's a long and winding road. A lot of things. There's a lot of things. I was always interested in writing. That was always the case. I had actually submitted stories. I've got rejection letters from Marvel and DC from 1978, 1980 around, of ideas that I had sent in early on. I was working in TV for about 20 years, but I always found a way to get involved in comics. I became good friends with Jimmy Palmiotti. We actually lived in the same building in Brooklyn together, went to the same comic shop. I used to raid all his comp boxes for free comics, which is the only way you can keep that habit going. And Jimmy and I had submitted things together, and I had done some writing for some comic press material. I had actually worked on a couple of comic magazines in the past, back in the later 80s, early 90s. And then ultimately what happened was that I had been working in TV, in animation. I had done some story editing and some script writing for some animated series, Reboot, War Planets, another show called Weirdos. So I'd done some writing in that sense and story editing there. And ultimately, it was just post 9/11. I had been on planes a lot. I used to fly a lot for my job because I was low. The studio was in Vancouver. I had an office in LA. I was living in New Jersey, so I was living on planes. I actually flew out of Newark Airport on the morning of 9/11. Got trapped in Canada. Got grounded in Canada for about 4 or 5 days. Couldn't get out of the country because we were, the borders were closed. And I realized I wanted to change the scenery. And I like to put it this way. The best way I can put it is I went on a blind date with Paul Levitz. I was always interested in comics. I had worked with during my days at ABC Children's Television. I worked with Jeanette Kahn on a Metal Men animated series. I developed it with Louise Simonson, and actually I was going to pull the trigger. It was going to be on the air, but right before I pulled the trigger, Disney bought ABC and blew out our block. They canceled all our shows. I had an hour built of it was Metal Men and Thunder Agents. I had a Thunder Agents animated series that I wanted to do. I did it with Marv Wolfman and the designs by Tom Grummett, I think. Something crazy. Anyway, so what happened was I was looking to get back on the East Coast. I was working on the West Coast, bouncing around all over the place. I went to meet a friend of mine, and my friend was sitting with Paul, and he says, "Listen, Paul Levitz is looking for somebody with outside experience and comic book knowledge." He says, "You're looking to get back on the East Coast. You have comic knowledge." He goes, "You two have dinner together. I'm going to go somewhere else." And he left me and Paul alone for dinner. And that turned into 6 interviews. And ultimately, they wound up creating a position for me at DC. And it was a learning experience because I was coming in with no publishing experience, but a lot of ideas and knowledge. And it took a little while to really get into that groove and understand how it works, and then ultimately, what we could do to make everything bigger and better.
Well, one of the things I remember from your tenure at DC is your DC Nation kind of in the back of the books.
Yeah.
I always found those to be interesting and very insightful. And did you just have like a topic that you wanted to talk about, or did?
Oh no, that was the running joke of the office. Okay, so what happened was, I was a big comic. I was a comic fan, but not just comic fan of stories. I was a fan of comics. I used to be the kid that read the sales charts in the back of the comics when they used to list them when they were on the newsstand, and I'm serious. I write all the numbers down. I compare to see what books are more popular than others. Have no idea other than I just found that interesting. But what I also loved was Stan Lee's soapbox, or there was the publishorial that Jeanette Kahn did when she took on the DC, and then Dick Giordano did the Meanwhile column for a while. And then there was also the things that were out there, like remember the Daily Planet page the DC had? A lot of fun stuff, Love the interaction with the fans. I love it. And it goes back to me is collaboration for creating the books, and community when you're talking about talent with the fan base. You want to create that sense of community and that sense of interaction. And so I always wanted to do that sort of page. And I had to earn it in a weird way. I had to earn the page. It's a long story, but I literally had to basically prove that I knew what I was going to do. And I told them that I wanted to do something new and weekly, which everybody wanted to kill me on, because ultimately they knew that if I was late on that one page, it delayed an entire week's worth of books. And I refused to give in. I said, no, we're going to do it. So when you ask me, what did you come up with? I'm telling you, I had a plan, like maybe 2 out of the 4 weeks, but the other 2 weeks we were winging it. And but was more fun though was I was winging it, but I also got the entire company involved. So if you look through some of the old DC Nation pages, I have the production people writing and the sales people writing and the editors writing. I even had my assistant write one in Italian because she was from Italy. And I said, I don't know, just do one in Italian. So there's an all Italian DC Nation page. And there was never a translation on it ever.
I think, thinking back on that now, it kind of brings back some fond memories of that particular time at DC, and just the focus and everything cohering, and the fuzzy glow of nostalgia and all that.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about now is in a lot of ways like that same vibe and ethos that Stan Lee created in 60s Marvel. This the bullpen of usual idiots just hanging out, having fun. They've all got wacky nicknames.
Yeah.
And I don't have to tell you this, but that was, to me, Stan Lee's most brilliant marketing move was making the reader feel like they were in on something.
Oh yeah,
behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And I just always really appreciated how you kind of tended to bring that sensibility back to DC, especially at that time in broader American and social history when 9/11 had just happened.
Yeah.
We're fractured, we're frazzled, and just having that kind of good vibe once a week is a nice little happy pill, so to speak.
Oh no, I had a blast writing it. As a matter of fact, I hated having to give it up, but I also knew that I was also becoming part of the problem, so I had to get some help there. But it's you talk about Stan Lee doing that, and I mean, there's a page of art that if I ever wanted to own a page of art, like go out and buy a page of art. There's one page of art I've always wanted, and it's I forget. I think it's in Fantastic Four annual, either 4 or 5, and it's a page where it's how the comics are made, and it's Stan is on the table or something, and he's holding a sword with a bucket on his head, and Jack's there drawing, and everybody else is running for cover while they're acting it out. And
I remember that.
I swear to God, that was my model on how to run the office in my mind. And I can't tell you, there was several times where I actually got up on my table to act out something because I always had that page like, this is the way comics are supposed to be made, is sheer insanity and chaos. And listen, it works to a point. It works against you, but the bottom line, it's got to be fun. You got to be enjoying what you're doing. I used to stop and say to everybody, guys, look at what we're doing. And we're sitting here getting upset on whether or not Superman is going to have a cape on or not have a cape on, and we're screaming at each other at things that are just so insanely ridiculous if somebody had just overheard it with no knowledge of our business. And I think, we take this stuff so seriously, but every once in a while you got to catch your breath, calm it down a second, and just enjoy the moment of what you're participating in. And sure. I think that's the thing that you can't take it too seriously, at the end of the day. But I know we do, but you got to still enjoy it just the same,
Yeah.
Hold on, people take this stuff seriously because I've heard the old DC convention podcasts where you do the panels. Nobody takes it seriously.
Oh no, we had a blast. There was a point there we were just we were I don't want to say out of control, but we were having a great time. I mean, the greatest compliment I ever got on a panel, true thing, is some person comes up to me, and we had a panel and it was raucous. I mean, we had people yelling and screaming with everybody's shouting from it, but what they were yelling about is about characters and story. They were so into the characters and story. They were on the attack. And
I bet it was Nightwing.
Yeah.
I suspect it may have been the Flash.
I'll get to that in a second. But the funny part was, the one guy comes to me at the end of the panel. He goes, "That's the best time I've ever had a convention in my life." He goes, "I learned nothing about any of your books, but I had so much fun." And I'm like, "That's great," because when I first got there, when I first got to DC, the story I tell is this: I went to a convention, my first convention as a DC employee. Had two great moments. So the first moment's not that great. So I sit in a room and there's a panel, and we have our 7 best writers up on the panel, 7 best writers in the business up on the panel. There's maybe 40 to 50 people in the room that holds about 500. Okay. And this is with your best talent on the table. And I'm like, holy shit, what's going on? And this is the first convention I'm doing as a DC employee. And every question was about archives and collections, and then one guy raised his hand, and I never forgot. I wish I knew who he was. Guy raised his hand and goes, "Are you going to collect all of the All-Star comics before I die?" Exact words. Stuck in my mind. And all I thought to myself is, oh my God, our fans are going to die and nobody else is going to be in this room. And it scared the living shit out of me because I just got into a business that I thought the people were dying. And I thought to myself, we got to get younger. We got to get more aggressive. We got to get more exciting. We got to get more vibrant. So all we don't do is talk about what we did before. I want to get people focused on what we're doing now and what's coming up. And that's when the big flip came. And we pulled people together, and ultimately we started figuring out stories and events. And I said, when I first got there, I says, we're not doing any events until we got our shit together. Meaning we have our characters working. We know what characters, because if you don't care about the characters, you're not going to care about the event. So you got to get people to care about the characters. And once they do, then you can build something major. And once that happens, when you put those characters at risk, people are going to get much more vested and involved. And that's what gets us to ultimately Infinite Crisis, along the way. And that gets you to the death of Nightwing. But the joke on the death of Nightwing is an easy one. The idea was, and I still believe in it to this day, so I don't really care. As a story engine, as a story potential, Nightwing's death would have been the perfect moment for Infinite Crisis. It would have been a defining moment for Infinite Crisis. I needed that same defining moment as when Supergirl died or Barry Allen Flash died in the First Crisis. I needed that big a character to die. And at that point, the story had a fracture between Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. They all were fighting. And I said I needed that one character that touched them all, that they all cared so emotionally about, that when that character died, it would bring them naturally together. They would overcome their differences and share the grief, and then ultimately rebuild the bond that was going to carry the universe forward. That's why that character was there. And I still believe he was the best character for that story. But anyway, so we changed it, and the story still works great, but I still think that's a better ending. So I'm telling that story, what I just said to you, at a convention. And I'm just relating it. I'm not thinking anything. I'm just relating it very simply and naturally. And there's this girl in the front row at the convention that every time I said Nightwing's going to die, she screams on the top of her lungs. Ah! She threw her hands up in the air and screamed. And I was stunned. I couldn't believe she did it. And I looked at her. I'm like, what are you upset about Nightwing dying? And then she screamed again. And I'm like, oh, I got something here. So literally everybody on the panel at some point talks about killing Nightwing just so we get the girl to scream. And every time she screams, the entire audience goes wild. And it makes for a great panel, but it turns into the story that we were so horrifically trying to kill Nightwing because it became this running gag. But ultimately, that's the origin of the death of the killing Nightwing gag story.
So that's pretty funny, actually. I gotta be with that for a while. But safe to say, like, the majority of your career in comics has been the behind the scenes guy. Now you've obviously got some cool writing credits. OMAC jumps out. Metalman is chef's kiss.
Especially the Wednesday comics.
Wednesday comics, yeah, we had a blast.
I wasn't
supposed to be on Wednesday comics. One of the teams dropped out, And then I went in and I said, they asked me if I wanted to do it. I said, you know what? I'd love to do Metal Men. And originally I was supposed to do it Ian Churchill. He couldn't do it. And then they go, and I go, okay, I'm out. And they go, well, we got you Garcia Lopez, and I'm back in. I'm back in.
Don't ask me twice.
Yeah.
But you know, I think all things being equal, people tend to think of you as the behind the curtains guy,
Yeah.
and not the writer guy. Now you've got Ancient Enemies with Frank Miller Presents.
Right.
That is your baby.
Yeah.
And it's coming out next week along with Ronin Book 2, #1.
Yeah.
What tell us about these Ancient of Enemies?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. It has a long origin story. I got a lot of things. See, it's funny because I always love to write, and I've always written, and I've written in different forms. But I've always been more business first because it was a much more steady and steady paycheck. And you were putting a kid to bed, so you know what it's important to have an important steady paycheck when you're putting 2 kids to bed. So I never got to really follow a writing career, and even when I had a chance to, I sort of ran away from it when I was in animation. But I always wanted to keep involved in writing, and I always had stories. I was always heavily involved in the stories. As a matter of fact, one of the problems I had as publisher was I got out of the mix, and I really missed it. You know, I really missed mixing it up and talking characters and stories and direction. So Ancient Enemies is something that been percolating in my head for a long time. It might even have origins in what I deem to be an Ultimate DC that we were planning at one point. But it's morphed so many times since then. But the logic is very much is that I always like to look at what's happening in society and what's happening in the world, and not to pick a side and not to choose a side, but to try to understand not just what the argument is about, but the motivations behind the argument and the levels of discussion that takes place behind the scene. And I wanted to build a property similar to what Darwin Cook did with New Frontier. And New Frontier, what I love about New Frontier, it tells this really long lyrical story with these characters moving in and out, showing how the world changes and they're changing along with it. And I loved how that was done. It's a brilliant book. And I wanted to see if I could capture some of that same energy with new characters and new stories. But the underlying theme behind it is basically institutionalized hatred. If you want to know what it is. And the idea that people fight and argue about things that they might not even know the origins of what they're fighting about. But but people are so institutionalized in their decision making and their argument or their stance that they basically are at war with each other without even understanding who the people are they're arguing with. That's the big picture. And then what I did is I created a world that has been drastically transformed by an alien ship crashing on Earth. You find out that these 2 ships were basically carrying combatants. They were going to fight out a millennial war between 2 individuals, because both sides have been fighting to the point of near extinction, but they refused to give up. So they picked 1 combatant each to basically choose the winner of the war. But instead of them being able to have that conflict, the conflict is brought to Earth, and they crash on Earth, and they give their conflict to the people of Earth. And now people are choosing sides around these 2 different worlds, and different heroes rise. And some people look at it opportunistically. Some people are looking at it to help others. And then ultimately, everybody starts to pick and choose sides, even though they don't understand the motivations for why they're doing it themselves. And it's a chance for self-examination. It's a chance for characters to really start to look at what they believe it to be. And one of the teams, or one of the lead teams of the story, is a group called the Greater Good. And that's one of my favorite expressions because it's been a motivating concept of mine. Honestly, it goes all the way back to Identity Crisis. When I looked at when we did Identity Crisis, the argument was, what would you do for the greater good? And what choices would you make? And you see people arguing, and everybody thinks they're doing the right thing, but they're so wildly different. It's because their greater good is different than someone else's. So I have a team called the Greater Good. You don't understand whether or not they're good or bad. They have clear motivations, but how they choose to enact them puts them on both sides of the fence. And then how the other characters react around them and how they rise is what's interesting. But I have a lot of characters. My primary characters are the two combatants from the alien world basically transfer their essences into two humans on Earth. So there's one character called the Genie that comes out of the Philippines. There's another character called First Responder, who is a person who was trapped on the fiery ship and was transformed into the combatant for the alien race. Then we have the Greater Good team, which is a fun mix of crazy characters. Really, honestly, I'm lost in the 70s every once in a while, and these guys basically are trapped in the 70s with me. And then I have this other concept, which is called the Wraith, which is a female superhero who basically gives up superheroing when these alien ships crash, and then finds herself pulled back into it when her son steals her costume and tries to become the new Wraith. And so we have a concept called Wraith and Son, which is basically a mother and son trying to superhero together, and it goes as well as you would imagine a soccer game would.
Okay, I gotta say that's such an awesome premise. I'm shocked nobody's really done it before.
Oh, it's awful. It's awful. And there's real animosity, because what happened is that during the crash, when she was out being a superhero, her husband and she believes her husband and son are both killed in the crash. So she doesn't know her son is alive, and he doesn't until he finds her 10 years later. And needless to say, there's a lot they need to work out. But we're having a blast. We're having a fun, and I want to add one last thing. So this is the important part of Frank Miller Presents, because here I am telling you a story that I want to do. And this is where the collaboration part comes in. So I went to Frank, and I had Ancient Enemies all figured out. Had it all figured out. And I go to Frank, I go, this is Frank Miller Presents. I need your fingerprints on this somewhere. You got to be touching every book. I don't want to make it look I'm operating independently of you. I got to make it sure like we're all the same company. Yeah. So he goes, I got a character. He goes, I'll create a character for you. Now, Frank and I have a running joke. Our running joke was Brother Power the Geek. Okay. Every time I call Frank and ask him for a book, a series when I was at DC, he goes, I want to do Brother Power the Geek. I said, you're never going to do that. I said, you were not going to waste Frank Miller on Brother Power the Geek. So
it would have sold.
Yeah. It's just not worth it. I'm sorry. So meanwhile, the movie Nightmare Alley's out at the same time. And so Frank goes, I got a character for you. He goes, I'm doing a geek. And he just looks me dead in the eyes. And I go, okay, give me a geek. And he creates a character, this misshapen creature. And I look at it and I go, I would never have come up with that. You know what I mean? It's not a type of character that my mind creates. I know how to work with them, but it's not a place that I would create it. This hunchback, misshapen creature that's, misunderstood and things like that. And which is funny because I'm a huge Hulk fan. You think I would have latched on to the concept. But he brought it into the mix and I go, huh. And all of a sudden, the story started to morph and started to change. Once you put that new idea in there, things start to reform around it. And it became an integral character very quickly, even though it started as a little bit of a joke. It became important to the series. And it's not something I would have ever created and wouldn't add that extra dimension if Frank didn't come into the mix and drop that into it. And that's the fun stuff, because Frank is actually editor-in-chief of Frank Miller Presents. And it's not something that he just wanted a title like executive producer of a movie. He actually wants to read, work, comment on every book, which is also a big pain in my ass, but it's actually extraordinarily helpful for every book that we do, and that's why he went in, he did a dialogue pass on Pandora. He comes in and he's giving notes to the layouts on Ancient Enemies. He's directing the entire thing on Ronin. So it's this really fun thing going on, and he's having a blast. We've been working on this for a while, and to actually hold it product and it comes out, it's quite rewarding at the end of the day.
Yeah, most definitely. Now I gotta ask, I didn't realize this until I started doing a little bit of my homework before our interview, but all three of these books that are slated for the first batch of FMP comics, 64 pages each and at a $7.99 price point. They're all 6-issue miniseries. Do you And I don't want to necessarily get into like pre-order numbers or whatever, unless you just really want to talk those numbers. But again, you're a numbers guy.
I still have a little DC left in me. I'm still not a lot of numbers.
But I mean, is there a part of you that's worried that $7.99 price point is going to scare folks off that are just going to?
It might have. It actually might have. It might have still scared some people off. Here's the way I look at it. Okay, a couple of things. First one is that not all the Ancient Enemies is 64 pages. Ronin is 54 and 48 on Pandora. And I know that the $7.99 price is there, but also I know that people, if they want to read something, they'll pay what they think is valuable on it. And quite honestly, we only have one variant cover on every book. And what we wanted to do is get people engrossed in the story and get the story. And the way, like I said, the way Frank's telling the story, he's doing these wild double page spreads on Ronin. I need more pages to make that work. It can't be a 32 page comic. You wouldn't get a real good, fulfilling reading experience from that. And to tell you the truth, I didn't want Ancient Enemies to be 64 pages. It just happened that way. I just kept on telling more story, and I couldn't stop myself.
I mean, look, it's a blessing and a curse to have a creative mind.
And listen, it might limit sales at the start. You're right. The goal is to build a base. The goal is to build an audience. I look at what people are spending money on at conventions and stories, comics. I see them spending money on signatures. I see them spending money on prints. I see them spending money on variant covers. I see them spending money on plastic books wrapped in plastic that they'll never read at a hell of a lot of higher price. So if they're willing to make an investment, what we're going to give them is a return on the investment on a level of enjoyment. Hopefully that makes it more valuable than the other books that are, supposedly valuable, so to speak, And that's what this is about. This is about reading. If we're not getting people to read it, we're not. I had a lot of stores come to me asking me for custom variants and all that, and I probably could have added 50% more to the overall sales of the book by agreeing to a lot of these custom variants and all that. But we drew a heavy line in the sand that we said we're not going to become part of the thing that we've been railing against. It'd be too hypocritical on our parts.
Sure.
So the truth be told is that we're holding the line with only, one variant cover. It's just an incentive cover for all intents and purposes. And, the price might change. The page count might change as schedules get tighter. We might find a better way to work it. But the way I looked at it is I got a $7.99 book. It's on a bi-monthly schedule. In theory, it could have been two $4 books, which would have been exactly what everybody else is doing.
Right.
So at the end of the day, it's the same cost if you're buying a monthly series over a year as you would be buying our book over a year. But for me, I wanted that every 2-month reading experience to be stronger and more enjoyable and valuable. Plus, also a lot of people have shifted to graphic novel reading. And so they're used to reading longer material. So I wanted to have something there too. So I feel, like I said, the good part is when you put down the book, you felt like you got something, you got something out of it. And that's the ultimate goal. I don't want incomplete thoughts in 32 pages anymore. It's a little too exhausting for me,
I can definitely appreciate that. And that's not to swipe against any creators that write in a more decompressed format or anything like that. But as a reader with 30 plus years collecting and reading, we've done the decompression thing. Let me have some comics that take me more than 5 minutes to read. Let's just get back to basics.
Yeah, and that's why my first book I have a lot of characters, and I didn't want to compromise any of them. I didn't want to shortchange them. I want to give everybody their moment. I didn't want to overextend the moment, like have people sitting around a dinner table for 12, 13 pages, passing butter around. But I've seen that book, and so what I really want to do is really, really want to have something where it's visually exciting, and then the dialogue and the story just adds to the value of the art. We're very much about artists first, and Frank, building all these books that we're looking going forward, we're looking at artists first, and then we're bringing talent in to help flesh that out so that we make sure that they match the visual style that we're trying to create more so than working the other way around,
That is awesome. Awesome. Chad, jump in, buddy.
Yeah.
Oh well, I was
Blah, 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 blah.
didn't want to
Maybe
shift the focus, but I was going to see if Dan wanted to talk about his special ambassador for the Inkwell Awards.
Oh yeah, well that's and
Oh,
that's
yeah.
it's I'm so glad you brought that up because you know what I mean. Those guys approached me to do this, and I was really excited when they do. The inkers, it's an interesting time because as things shift digitally, the inkers seems to be sort of being pushed aside a little bit as people go to digital inking and pushing everything onto a pad. The problem is the value of the art diminishes because of that. And I honestly believe that the inker can help make or break a book. I think it's essential to the process. I think it adds weight to the line. It brings value to the art and also brings some level of extra creativity, especially for really the finer inkers. You can tell what inkers are which based upon how a book looks. And I think we diminish people's values because we keep constantly thinking we're finding creative or digital tools to replace them. And I'm very strong about believing the inker adds value and adds weight to the page, and I think the book looks and reads better. We had gotten away from inkers in places, and to tell you the truth, we got away from inkers for all the wrong reasons. Page rates were going higher on the penciler, so what did you do? You eliminate the inker to basically compensate for the cost of the book. That's where it starts, and that's the wrong way to start. You devalue what somebody's creation was, and some of my closest friends in the business are inkers. Started at inkers. Jimmy Palmiotti, Prado. Some of these guys extraordinarily talented and so valuable to the work, and they were so in demand because people knew they added onto them. And you could see some artists who were extraordinarily popular, you could see their work diminished in places based upon what inker is on them. And that's not that's that. And so you can't not give them credit in that places. They should get as much credit in there. That's why we consider Daniel Enriquez not even the inker on the book, but co-artist in some ways with Philip for all the value that he brings to the page. So, I mean, this is a lot what goes on there. So I think that's important, because I go into that, and like I said, as we shift and we have more tools to create more interesting visuals, again, you still have to understand the basics and the knowledge of what you're doing and what it works. And I think the other mistake that we're seeing in comics today is too many people think they're colorists just because they know how to work a program. They have no idea on how color works. And that's why a lot of these books look like mud, or just these pastel Skittles throw up that winds up on a lot of them. That's why I work with somebody like Alex Sinclair, because ultimately he's creating a palette for us that'll be a template for what I'm trying to do with other books. And Emma Kubert, she's one of the few that I could say could color her own material because she's so incredibly qualified and talented to be able to do that, and understands the pure basics of what she needs to accomplish in color too. And these are things. It goes back to the craft issue that we're talking about. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I learned that back in the days when I worked in computer animation. Just because we had programs that allowed us to do things doesn't mean we should just put them into. We always used to have a running joke in computer animation, the early days with motion capture, because the people that they used to put in the motion capture suits were the animators, right? And they would sit, and if you ever watch early computer animation, people would talk like this all the time because they figured that it was motion capture, so we need motion happening. And that's the mistake. And like I said about colorists, just because you have all these colors, you don't need to use them all. It's okay, Use the right ones in the right places. Don't try to put every freaking color on every page. It's a little crazy, And that's stuff that we're watching out for, and we try. And these are subtle things that nobody might recognize, but they might feel more comfortable with the product because it makes it more accessible. And we've actually desaturated the colors in our books, so they're a little flatter and a lot more vibrant. Because when you work on a screen, backlight makes colors brighter, but everything you're reading on a book, it's top lit. So therefore, it's going to be having a different way of reacting with light. And you got to be aware of these things when you're making your comics.
That's actually really insightful. I'd never thought about that before. So we've talked up Ronin 2, we've talked up Ancient Enemies. The third book of the initial launch,
Yeah.
we've got Pandora.
Yeah.
Emma Kubert and forgive me, Crystal Emma Kubert on art, Anthony Moranville, and
Chris
somebody
Silvestri.
with the last name Chris Silvestri.
No,
Any
it's not
relation to Mark?
Silvestri. No.
Okay, all right. It's just an astounding coincidence.
No, actually, Anthony and Chris. I actually have a prose novel coming out in April. I wrote a book.
Oh, congratulations!
Yeah. I did it on my. I call it. I did it on my COVID vacation, and and I wrote a book. It's a young adult novel. It's called Hide or Seek. It's about a young kid who didn't know his father was a superhero. The father gets killed, and ultimately the kid gets thrown into witness protection out of fear that the father's villains are going to come hunting his family down now that he's dead. And in the process, then in the process of being witness protection, he finds out that the city the town that he's put in isn't exactly what it's supposed to be either. So there's a lot of fun there. So I was doing my very first novel. I had a lot of things going on. And I had met Anthony and Chris, and they had helped me structure the book with me, and it was great. They're both writers from TV. They worked on Star Trek Discovery. They worked on a couple of Star Trek series. And I worked with them there. And when I know I needed a good young voice to help out on Pandora, I put those two guys into the team over there, and it's been a great match. And they work great with Frank, and they work great with Emma, and it's just a good team. And good people. It's good people, man. And that's important. You got to like who you work with. It's so important.
Well, and the fact that it's skewed towards all ages readers or young adult, either way you want to put it, really helps set it apart from the other two big first launch books. And
we're going for as many genres as possible.
You should.
We got some horror coming down the line. We're talking about, and also, Frank's got a Sin City book that he's going to write and draw, but it's a Western. It's done.
Yeah, 1856, right?
Exactly, man. That's what it is. It's all about it, and he's doing it as a Western. And again, it's not about repeating himself. It's finding a way to tell that style of story in a new manner, and that's what's good about it.
It sounds to me like with this new venture, the sky's the limit, and you guys are going to be very willing and open to working with all types of different creators. Your vision board 5 years from now, assuming everything is successful, like how big do you want to get with this?
No,
feasibly, how big honestly, can you get with this?
5 years later.
5 years later. I know I did that 5 years later. It never ends well. It's 5 years later. I'm in a dystopic future. Everybody's dead. No, I'm just. It's
somebody call Azzarello.
No, it's, you know what? Honestly, we talked about that. It's hard to say because, like I said, there's only two of us doing all the work. So the idea of that scares the hell out of me. But if we get to the spot and we have to see, first of all, if the material works, and we have to figure out financially how to move forward and how these things click in style. But we'll grow slowly. We have a couple of creators that we want to be in business with, and we're already talking to them. But we don't want to rush anything. And we certainly don't want to be competing with any of the companies. We're not in competition with anybody but ourselves. That's why we're doing 1-2 books a month at the start. The books are bi-monthly. We're moving product in and out. Even with the Ancient Enemies books, I'm doing some one-shots of the individual characters, but they're regular 32-page comics, and it's more just to have that one extra book on the shelf. But hopefully within a year's time, we can do a reevaluation. And if we feel that the market is accepting us and interested in us and wanting to do more, 4 books a month, maybe. maybe, 4 books a month, something like that. Nothing too crazy. And it's really going to determine on the quality of the product, not just to fill a bucket. I spent 20 years filling buckets. That's exhausting. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Never let it be said that you're a man unafraid or who's afraid of taking risks. Chad, do you have any last questions for Dan?
Oh no, I'm good. I just want to thank him for getting back to me after I stepped outside of my comfort zone at the show. It's like, I'd like to do an interview.
No, like I said, this is it's funny. You guys look at it talking about doing an interview, and I look at it as talking comics. You know what I mean?
I'll take that.
That's the way I look at it. I can talk comics all day. I honestly, that's the one. If you miss anything out of a job, it's you miss the people and talking comics all day long. That's the stuff that I probably miss most from my previous position. So anytime I get somebody's ear, I'll be more than happy to talk. I know the guys at DC were sick of my voice, but hey, I got a whole bunch of new people now.
I tried that at work, and nobody even like he's talking.
I try to explain that to people. Every time I hear people complaining and bitching about comics business as a whole, I said, you go talk to somebody who has a real day job, or somebody who's working in another area in a factory or a law.
Right.
You know what I mean? Talk to those guys. Hear what they do, and how they spend their day, and then take a second and enjoy what you're doing a little bit more, and come in with a fresh set of eyes on what you're trying to accomplish. I think we lose sight of this. This is what we are participating in people's hobby and enjoyment, and regardless of getting people upset about books, you have to respect them. You have to listen to them. Sure. Because ultimately, that level of investment is what's important to them, and you should never mock or have a problem with what's important with people. You gotta let these people enjoy this shit. And I'll say the same thing to the fans: go back to enjoying it. If you're that miserable, then don't do.
Yeah.
But if you want to have some fun, let's have some fun together. Let's make some books and let's enjoy ourselves. And we'll go from there.
I think that's a great motto. Dan, thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Pleasure, guys. It's really nice talking to you both.
Yeah, absolutely. To you and to Frank and everybody else there at Frank Miller Presents. Best of luck to you guys. Seriously. Absolutely. Clearly, a ton of heart in this venture.
Yeah. This is we're super excited. The books look beautiful, and I hope everybody enjoys them. That's the main thing, man. That's the main.
I can't wait to read them.
You got
it. And hopefully we can have you back once they've been out and hear how the experience has gone.
That's it. Yeah. Hopefully it won't be in the dollar bin box, but we'll be doing good.
Insolvency. No, never happened.
That's it. Thanks a lot,
All
guys.
right. Ladies and gentlemen, Dan DiDio, thank you so much. We're the Comic Watchers, and this is our show. Thank you, and until next time, do some good in the world.